this session, what we're going to start talking about now is we're going to start looking at the resource requirements that you might find in your business, particularly where they come into thinking about your operational plan and putting everything together. When we talk about resources in a business, we start to look at the various bits and pieces. We're starting to talk about the goods and services. Okay, so when you think about that, what we're looking at there is we're starting to look at, well, what stock do you need? Okay, we start to look also at human resources. Okay, so it's something there's a finite amount of. When we talk about human resources, we could be looking at things like your training, how many people you have, what sort of people you have. Okay, what's the stuff you can use here, pretty much. We look at your technological resources. Okay, so we need to think about, well, what computer systems do you have? Okay, so what sort of computer systems? Do you have iPads? Do you have, computer systems like, your desktops, etc. All those bits and pieces that are actually going to help you run the business there. When we look at the physical element, what we're looking at there is we're looking at your physical aspects and your physical resources, your buildings. Okay, so do I actually have a premises? Do I have a warehouse? Do I have a shop front? What are the things that I have there? We look at your financial resources. Okay, financial resources, the money on hand, okay, the amount of cash that you've got there, as well as your stock requirements. Okay, so what do I have? What is the stock? How do I need to keep it? Various storage and that sort of gear there. Okay, we need to think about the upgrade to our resources as well. Okay, so at what point do we need to start upgrading or thinking about what are we going to go to in the future? We might start with a certain level of human resources, but what's it going to be later? Okay, so we start to think about where our improvements need to be. We're going to need to start thinking about our resource allocation. So when we have these resources and we put them into a bit of a pile and understand what we have available to our operation, we need to start thinking about, well, where are we going to allocate it? If I've only got a certain number of people and they're only available certain hours, well, where do I want to put those people? If I need to think about my technological resources, if I'm a bit limited and I don't have everything I need, well, how am I going to use these to make sure I can do what as much as it can? Okay, so I need to think about if I have a plan going along, I need to understand, well, if I implement a new plan, what effect is that going to have on these things? Obviously, I might be in business already, I might be changing a plan. What's it going to do to these things? Okay, so if my plan is to open a new store, when I've already got one store, well, where am I going to get the people from? Am I going to take the original people from my original store and move them across and run a little bit short in both? How am I going to split these things up? What about the finances? How am I going to split those between the existing operation and the new operation? Okay, so any of those changes, we really need to think about what it's going to mean for that. And we might be starting to look at how do we get support for the plan, okay? Because remember, we need to talk to our human resources about our plan and say, this is what we're going to try and do. And we might find that it ends up that we might need to make chops and changes, we might need to consolidate our resources, and it might often mean that we're working with fewer people or in less time. Because time's a resource as well. And sometimes it's the resource that we have that's really quite starved, okay? Because time becomes very critical. There's a lot of things we need to achieve. Sometimes we don't have a long time to achieve them. Okay, so in a nutshell, our resources starts to cover the goods and services, our human resources, so our people, and when we look at that, we're looking at their skills, we're looking at the number of them, we're looking at their training and development, okay, what have they got there, their availability of time. Okay, we're looking at our technological resources, so our computer systems, software, hardware, etc. We're looking at our physical resources, which is our place. What do we have available? Is it a spare bedroom? Is it a spare house? Is it a spare warehouse? What is it? We need to think about our financial resources, which is our ability to access money to continue our operations. And we need to think about our stock requirement as well, and how our stock in trade works. And also, that last little one there, time. Time is a resource. We need to make sure that when we're approaching these things, that we're managing the time, that we've got good calendars, good ways to allocate the time resources, and to make sure that we're not overusing things to the point that a resource starts to break. Okay, so that's really the general considerations. Where do I want to deploy these resources through my operation to make sure the operation can actually function effectively, that it isn't too short, that it's running with at least the minimum it does require. And that's really our resource considerations when adopting that for use in our operations planning. Thank you very much.